Okay, good morning. I think it's 11 o'clock, just hitting 11 o'clock now, so I think we'll crack on with today's webinar, Paternity Leave and Family Friendly Leave. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Today I'm joined by my colleague Audrey Mooney. Audrey is a payroll guru here at Thesaurus Software.
Good morning, everyone.
We don't have our camera on today, so we apologise. We find sometimes that the sound, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but the sound seems to work better when we don't have the camera on. So just so you know who we are, we put our two lovely mug shots there on the screen for you at the moment. As always with our webinars, we'll kind of go through our presentation first, and then we're happy to take all kind of questions that you have at the end. But please, we see some questions already coming in, so actually just send them in as you think of them, but we'll get to them at the end if you don't mind. I've listed the topics here that we're going to cover today. There's a lot in these topics, so I suppose without any further ado, we'll crack on with the webinar. So kicking off with paternity leave, as I'm sure you're all well aware at this stage, paternity leave became legislation in Ireland for the first time ever from 1st of September 2016. So across the board, the introduction of paternity leave really has been seen as a positive, and it's really been widely welcomed, as I suppose it recognises the role of fathers in the family. I suppose it's too early days yet to say what the take-up will be, but certainly I've seen and I've heard of a number of cases of people taking it at the moment. So hopefully the uptake will be great. And I suppose up until now, paternity leave in Ireland really was purely at the discretion of employers, leaving many new fathers or parents forced to take annual leave or unpaid leave on the birth of a child. And I just wanted to show you this graph actually, because when I was doing my research into this, I found this EU comparison a little bit interesting, I suppose. So if you compare Ireland with our EU neighbours, I think up until now we have probably been lagging quite miserably behind, I suppose. I suppose looking at Slovenia there, they offer 13 weeks paternity leave. But also what I think is interesting with this graph, if you look at Portugal there, they offer 4 weeks paternity leave. But what's interesting about Portugal is that 2 of those weeks are actually compulsory. So parents have to take 2 weeks paternity leave, which is again interesting. And also if you're kind of looking down and drilling into it in the UK, we see here that the UK have 2 weeks paternity leave. But also in the UK, fathers and mothers can share maternity leave or share part of maternity leave in the first year after a child's birth. So, a lot of other countries have more progressive structures in place, but definitely the introduction of paternity leave here is a step in the right direction. And obviously, whilst it is long overdue in Ireland, it will of course pose some challenges to employers, particularly maybe small employers like yourselves who might not have the different structures, but we'll move on now to look at what is paternity leave and what's involved in it. So what is it? Paternity leave, the legislation applies to fathers and partners in same-sex couples. So the legislation refers to a term as relevant parents. You may or may not come across this. The leave entitlement is for 2 weeks on the birth of a child or placement of a child for adoption. So it applies to adoption cases as well. Just to note here as well that in cases of multiple births, so let's say twins or triplets, the father or the parent is only entitled to the 2 weeks. So it's 2 weeks on the birth, regardless of how many children that may be. The parents can request to take the leave at any time within 26 weeks of the child's birth or the date of adoption. So any time in the first 6 months. It doesn't have to be as soon as the baby is born. Also, actually, when we're talking about who it's available to, it's available to all employees. So regardless if that employee is part-time, works casual hours, or regardless of whether they have just started employment with yourself, they are entitled to it. And actually, I know we don't take questions during the webinar, but an interesting question came in before we started, and the question was that they have an employee whose partner is not based in Ireland. The partner's due a baby, but they're living at home or in a different country. But will this employee be entitled to paternity? I would say yes, they are entitled to it because the father in this instance is an Irish employee, and the Irish legislation applies to them. But what they will need to do, and we'll cover it in a few minutes as well, once that they can provide some sort of a confirmation, medical cert, that the mother is expecting a baby, then I would say yes, that employee would be entitled to the paternity leave as well. Already tripping up on the maternity that didn't take long. And then finally, just kind of looking at the paternity side, the 2 weeks leave has to be taken in one continuous block. So it won't be allowed for the employee to take 1 day a week for a number of weeks. It has to be taken in a continuous block. So that should as well help to minimise the disruption for any employers rather than having the leave broken into separate periods. So just again to look at the paternity applications. Employees who want or are wishing to or planning to take paternity leave must give their employers 4 weeks written notice. This period, again, for yourselves as employers, you really should use this period to help plan and plan cover to cover that absence. Now, in exceptional cases, you can waive the right to that 4 weeks period, particularly perhaps if it's a premature birth or something like that. Generally, in practice, that 4 weeks notice will be given in the form of the form PB2. Now, if you're familiar with maternity, you'll know that the maternity form is the MB10 form that expectant mothers submit and employers fill out if they're due a baby. So in say this is very much the same kind of thought process, because the process of paternity is very much mirroring maternity, if you like. So what most probably will happen in most cases is that the parent planning to take paternity leave will come to you or come to the employer with their PB2 form, and you'll have to sign a piece of that and complete a piece of that. And what will happen then is that a new P2C file will be issued for the employee in terms of their payroll side of things, but Audrey will deal with that in a little bit more detail later. So I've already touched on the next point, but employees should also provide a written medical confirmation of the baby's due date, or in the case where the baby has already been born, they should provide confirmation of the baby's birth. And of course then in adoption cases they'll need to provide a certificate from the adoption office confirming the adoption as well. Just a final point on the whole application process. It's not really related to the payroll side of it or even really the employment side, but it's kind of, I think it's just a nice FYI. Some of you will be familiar with the public services card, which is the kind of the new card which is made available and for people who are seeking public funds. So if you have a father or a parent who's looking to take paternity leave and then obviously looking to take paternity pay, they will need to have a public services card. Now it's very much up to the employee themselves to go and apply for this card in their own time, etc. But it's a very straightforward process, but it might be just something for you as employers to know and to bear in mind that if somebody comes to you requesting paternity leave, it might be just a nice kind of reminder to the employee to say, do we have your public services card? So just to move on then to the pay. Paternity leave will be paid at the same rate as statutory maternity pay, which is currently set at €230 per week. In order to be eligible to receive this payment, the employee must meet certain PRSI criteria. As with maternity pay, there is no obligation on employers to make any top-up pay for their paternity leave. However, if you already top up maternity pay, you will need to consider offering similar schemes for those on paternity leave, just to ensure equality across all your employees. And again, it's new legislation, so we haven't seen cases, and there haven't been any cases on this, but it could well be that over time we will have cases where a company is paying for employees or topping up maternity pay but not topping up paternity pay. So that would be possibly a discrimination claim. So just be aware of that. So if you do have a maternity policy in place that tops up maternity pay, then you need to consider and take time and consider your paternity pay and what are you going to put in place for that. Paternity leave is a protected leave, so all other benefits do remain in place while it's on paternity leave. But I know we're just going to cover that in a little bit more detail in a few moments, so I'll just leave that there on that. So just finally on paternity leave, really the key issues for businesses now is to Review any existing policies that you might have had in place. Did you have a paternity leave policy in place? Did you already allow employees to take time off? And was that paid? So how are you going to marry that in with the new legislation? So if you have a paternity policy in place, I definitely say review it. And if you don't have a paternity policy in place, now is the time to put one in place, because you will need one, because if a paternity leave request lands on your desk, and as you've already seen, people are taking paternity leave, and you want to be prepared and you want to have a point of reference in how to deal with the process and the steps that the employee must follow. So also, and as with any policy, I suppose, having a policy in place will help ensure consistency across all your employees. I suppose the type of things that you would like to see in your paternity policy would really just, it doesn't have to be a long or overly complicated policy, but just to clearly explain how employees should apply for paternity leave and what their entitlements are. And then just, I suppose, a very final point, a very brief point on paternity leave is to be sure to keep all your records and any details of employees taking paternity leave, and they must be kept for a period of 8 years. So hopefully that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of paternity leave. There's some questions coming in, but we'll take them later on. And I'll pass you across to Audrey.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, so just to look at maternity leave. So expectant mothers in Ireland are entitled to 26 weeks maternity leave, during which time they will receive statutory maternity pay. There's also an additional 16 weeks that can be taken, and these are unpaid. And if an employee wishes to take any of the unpaid leave, it must be taken immediately after the end of the statutory, the paid maternity leave. Under the Maternity Protection Act, at least 2 weeks have to be taken before the end of the week of your baby's expected birth, and at least 4 weeks after. Okay. You can decide how you would like to take the remaining weeks. Generally, employees take 2 weeks before the birth and the remaining weeks after. If you qualify for maternity benefit, at least 2 and no more than 16 weeks must be taken before the end of the week the baby is due. All expectant mothers will be entitled to the same amount of maternity leave regardless of how long they have been working for you or the number of hours they work. So you can see there just in the screen, so there's 26 weeks paid maternity, so that's paid by the Department of Social Protection, and then the further or additional 16 weeks or part of 16 weeks can be taken then, which is unpaid. Okay. So just to look then at maternity applications, so the intention to take maternity, there's 4 weeks written notice to the employer, and the application for payment is made on the form MB10. So 4 weeks notice from the employee to the employer of their intention to take maternity leave. In reality, I suppose employers generally are going to know well before that. So really they should give you as much notice as possible, and that will allow then, for health and safety considerations to be taken into account. Okay. Again, in relation to the additional maternity leave, so this is the 16 weeks that we have referred to, the employee should give an employer 4 weeks notice before the end of the maternity leave period if they wish to take unpaid maternity leave. Okay. And 4 really is the magic number. When returning to work, they should give you 4 weeks notice of their intended return to work date. Okay, so it's 4 weeks for all of the notice, if you like, okay? So just to touch on health and safety, not to scare people here, but when you have an employee, pregnant employee, you should conduct a risk assessment to determine the hazards that the pregnant woman is exposed to. And hazards, might include lifting heavy loads or exposure to extreme temperatures, exposure to certain chemicals. I suppose for most employers, this isn't a concern. So, it's something that for a lot of us we don't need to be concerned about, but it's something that it's good just to be aware of. If a hazard cannot be removed, the working conditions should be adjusted, or you could provide alternative work, or I suppose if these aren't options, then you would have to grant health and safety leave. So there's a lot of information on the HSA website, so it just gives detailed information in relation to the health and safety in pregnancy. So it's definitely worth people just having a read of that and just having a look at what's the information that's available there. So during health and safety leave, employers must pay employees their normal wages for the first 3 weeks, after which health and safety benefit will be paid from the Department of Social and Family Affairs. Again, as we said, for most people, most employers, this isn't an issue. Employees on maternity leave are entitled to return to work under the same job and terms and conditions as before they left. There is an exception to the legislation which states that if it is not reasonably practicable for you to allow an employee to return to their job, you must provide them with suitable alternative work, and any such change should not be on terms any less favourable than previously. In relation then to antenatal appointments, an employee is entitled to paid time off to attend medical or related antenatal care. They should give 2 weeks' notice for those appointments, again, where that's possible, or I can't think of the word.
Yeah, but usually there is an exception for the first appointment as well, obviously.
Yeah, if there was an emergency appointment or something, but absolutely where possible, 2 weeks' notice should be given. Employers may request medical evidence, so that's, they're perfectly entitled to do that. And just as we said there earlier on, so just they are entitled to return to the same job.
Yeah, we've kind of come across it before, where companies might ring in and say, we've somebody on maternity leave, and actually we found out since she's been gone, we put in a nice practice in place, and we've a nice little rota working, and sure it's working out grand. Well, maybe we don't need this person anymore, and unfortunately you can't just decide you don't need that woman anymore because you're working fine without her. She is entitled to come back to her role as it was. So just to be aware of that.
Excellent. Just then to look at adoption leave. So under the Adoption Leave Act, mothers are entitled to adoptive leave. So there's 24 weeks adoptive leave, so that's statutory adoptive pay, again paid by the department. And there is also the additional 16 weeks additional adoptive leave that is unpaid. Employers should, when employees take adoptive leave or maternity leave that is unpaid, so if they take any part of the 16 weeks additional leave, employers should complete either a maternity leave credits form or an adoptive leave credits form, and this just will ensure that the employee's social insurance record is kept up to date. So it ensures that they're getting those, that social insurance record or the stamps for that unpaid maternity or adoptive pay. With the adoptive leave then, again, it's 4 weeks notice of the intention to take the leave, and the employees are entitled to paid time off to attend preparation classes or adoption meetings. Okay. So just to look then at pay for maternity and adoption. So again, this is set by the Department of Social Protection, and as Laura said, as with paternity, it is currently €230 per week, and there is no obligation on the employer to top up these leave payments. But again, as Laura said, it's very, very important just to be consistent. Okay. So the benefit payments then, paternity, maternity and adoptive benefits are all taxable payments. Okay, but they are not subject to USC or PRSI. And they are taxed by revenue, and they do this by reducing the employee's tax credits and rate bands, or tax credits and standard rate cut-off points. So although they're taxed, it's not the employer that's taxing the payments, it is revenue. Okay. In relation to the benefit payments, the employers will be advised of the adjusted tax credit and cut-off points on the employer tax credit certificate, or the P2C file. So in relation to any changes, to an employee's tax details, it's notified on the P2C file. As with all new P2C files, they should be imported or applied immediately to the payroll, so immediately on receipt. Okay, that's very, very important. Okay. So just in relation to processing the benefit payments, if the employee is not being paid, depending on your payroll software, you would either zeroize the employee's hours or basic pay, or suspend them, whatever the relevant treatment is for your payroll software. So in other words, there's just nothing going through the payroll for them. You're importing the new amended P2C file, but there's no payment going through. If the employee is being paid while they're on the leave, you enter the employee's paid hours or basic pay in accordance with the company leave policy. And this is the treatment for paternity, maternity and adoptive. So it's the same process regardless of the type of leave. If the benefit is paid into the employer's bank account, then it must be processed on the payroll as a non-taxable addition. So on the forms there is an option, to indicate the bank account that the payment is to be paid into. So if it's paid into the employer's bank account, it needs to be paid back to the employee as a non-taxable addition. The reason being it has already been taxed by the reduction in tax credits and cut-off points. Okay. So just to look at an example here, so in this example we have an employee that is paid during the leave, and again this can be for any of the leave, any of the different leave types. So if the employee is on a regular basic pay of €900 and they're receiving a benefit payment of €230, so the top up then via the payroll must be €570, giving a total payment of €900. And just to stress, if the employee receives the benefit payment, it does not go through the payroll. If the employer receives it, it needs to be processed as a non-taxable addition. So for the employee then not paid during leave, so if, for example, in this one we have a regular basic pay of €500 and the benefit payment that they're receiving directly from the department is €230, the top up or the payment through the payroll is zero, so it's not applicable, so the total payment they're receiving is €230. As I said, depending on this payroll software that you're using, you'll either zeroize or suspend the employee. Okay. So just to look then at annual leave during this leave. So employees accrue annual leave while on parental, maternity, including additional maternity leave, paternity and adoptive leave, and that includes the additional adoptive leave as well. And public holidays are also accrued during this leave. So in other words, for the purpose of annual leave and public holiday entitlements, time spent on these types of leave are treated as though the employees were in employment. So just to look at an example here of annual leave, so this example I'm using an employee on maternity leave. So their normal holiday entitlement is 22 days per annum. Okay. So the employee commences maternity leave on the 8th of February 2016. They have taken 5 days annual leave before commencing maternity leave. So before the 8th of February they've taken 5 days annual leave. Okay. They take the additional 16 weeks maternity leave, okay, and return to work on the 28th of November 2016. So when that employee returns to work, the return work status, if you like, is that they have 17 days annual leave remaining. So although they're on leave from the 8th of February and don't return to work until the 28th of November, they still have the benefit of the full annual leave entitlement, so they have their remaining 17 days to take.
Yeah, and actually that's one thing that we just think about there in the Rotary. In some companies their policies might be that no, we don't allow employees to carry leave over from one year to the next. When it comes to maternity, you have to make the exception, and because they've accrued it and they weren't able to take it because of maternity, they have to be allowed to carry that leave over into the next leave year.
An exception there.
Yeah, absolutely. Just that one exception. Okay. I'll go on from here to parental leave, and it's probably one of those type of leaves that can be a little bit confusing for some people. It can cause confusion. So parental leave is available to parents to assist them with looking after young children, and each parent has an entitlement to 18 weeks leave per child. And this leave is available up until the child's 8th birthday or their 16th birthday in cases where the child is disabled or where they have a long-term illness. So just actually looking at that, if we look at this picture of the family here that we have on our screens, as you can see, we have the mom and the dad and the 2 children, the perfect 2.4 family. But they have 2 children, each parent in this case. So I don't know, my cursor will go over it. So the mother here, she will have 36 weeks paternity leave. She'll have 18 week parental leave. Thank you, Robin.
Also like.
Yes, she will have 36 parental leave. 36 weeks parental leave. She'll have 18 in relation to the daughter, and she'll have 18 in relation to the son. Similar, the father will also have 36 weeks leave, and 18 for the son and 18 for the daughter. So it's both parents are entitled to it. Parents are not normally allowed to share or transfer parental leave. There is only one exception where if both parents are employed by the same employer. In that instance, where the employer agrees, there is the ability to transfer some of the leave, not all of it. They could only transfer up to 14 weeks leave in that situation. And also then parental leave is unpaid, so there's no statutory top-up or statutory amount, as already touched on, statutory maternity or paternity pay. There's nothing like that for parental leave, it's just unpaid. So how do employees take parental leave, in what form? Because it's quite a large chunk of leave. We may be looking at 36 weeks in that situation. So how do they take it? Legislation specifies that there's two ways that employees can take it. It says employees can take it in an 18-week block, or they can take take two periods which have to have a minimum of a 6-week block, and they must have a 10-week block in the middle, so that the employee could take 6 weeks in this example. They must return to work for a period of at least 10 weeks, and then they can take another block, and in this instance I put it down as a 12-week block. So that's what legislation states. However, employees can set alternative terms based on your own business needs, and I suppose once they are in no way less favourable than what the legislation states. And to be perfectly honest, and in my experience, this tends to be what most companies do. So some employers will allow individuals to take one day off, maybe say, so rather than working a 5-day week, they work a 4-day week for a certain period until they use their assignment or allotted parental leave, and it just takes it can make more sense for a company. Obviously, an 18-week solid block is be a very long period of time to try and bring in cover, and so you can make it work to your organisation. In terms of how an employee applies for it, employees wishing to take parental leave must give their employers a minimum of 6 weeks notice in writing. So again, this period allows you to prepare and make plans for that. The question then that I'm often asked is, do you have to accept applications or can you refuse them? Well, requests can be refused on the grounds of non-entitlement, so the employee, isn't entitled to it, but otherwise, no, you can't refuse applications for parental leave. What you can do is you can postpone a request, and you can postpone it for up to 6 months. The grounds on which you can generally postpone it would be included. You might have lack of cover, it might be a particular busy period, if you're seasonal, if employment is seasonal or seasonal busy times over the Christmas season or whatever it is, then you could seek to reach an agreement with the employee to postpone it for a period of time. And generally you can only do that once. Again, in exceptional, very exceptional cases you could look to postpone it twice, but other than that you really need to be approving and requesting applications for parental leave. So just kind of very briefly to touch on pay and benefits in relation to parental leave. As I've already mentioned, parental leave is unpaid. There's no statutory payment either. And also, we talked about earlier where maternity and paternity can be topped up, and employers will offer an additional payment. This is generally doesn't tend to be the practice for parental leave. It is just unpaid leave. However, with regard to all other benefits and leave, and annual leave during parental leave, they all do still apply, and as already mentioned earlier, it's just all of the benefits should be treated as though the employee was in employment. So all annual leave accrues while they're off, and that would also include public holidays. And then finally, parents who take parental leave may get PRSI credits for the week or weeks that they've taken the leave. So to make sure that this happens, employees need to write to the Department of Social Protection just to confirm the employee took parental leave over the specific period of time. Obviously, there's no need to do this if the employee took leave less than a week, if they took just one day at a time. Am I correct in saying that?
Absolutely, yeah. So something where their insurable weeks would be decreased. This will just bring them back up to their full 52 weeks or 53, depending on the tax year.
Yeah. Just to give them that credit. So that's it's just a simple letter that you need to put together. Quite straightforward.
It's strange that there's no form for that.
Yeah.
With the others, yeah, it is just a letter, but it's, yeah.
So just moving on from there, what else do you really need to know in terms of parental leave? Generally, employees must have been working with you for a year before they are entitled to take parental leave. However, if they have just joined you and their child is near the age of the threshold, the 8 or the 16, then we can make an exception. So if they have been working with you for more than 3 months, they will be entitled to take a pro rata amount of parental leave. So this will be 1 week's leave for every month of employment that they have been working with you. Parental leave is to be used only to take care of the child concerned. If the parental leave is taken and used for another purpose, the employer is entitled to cancel this leave. And actually, this is an interesting one because I did have a case on this recently where we had a company and they had a guy who was working with them in kind of a labouring role, should I say, doing odd jobs, maintenance work, but he was taking long periods of parental leave, so we talk about long extended weekly periods. Through kind of investigation or whatever happened, it came out that actually he was taking parental leave, but he was actually taking the parental leave to do contract work on the side for himself, basically. So in that instance, the employer cancelled the parental leave because he was abusing a policy. He was taking it not to look after his children, but to go and do contract work elsewhere. So it's just kind of an FYI to yourselves. Also then, just moving on, the employee returning from a period of parental leave are entitled to request a change in their working pattern or hours hours for a set period. So they may ask for some flexible working hour, later finish, a later start and earlier finish for a certain period of time. Absolutely, the employer is under no obligation to accept or approve such a request, but they really should be fully considered. And again, the last point there, the records for a period of 8 years. So we mentioned that with the paternity, and again, that should apply to maternity, adoption, and parental leave as well. It's just to be sure that you have your records in order. Should there ever be, need to refer back to them, or should you ever have a WRC inspection or anything like that. Is that okay?
Okay, back to me. Okay, so just to look then, or to speak about force majeure leave. So this is statutory leave to attend a family crisis. Generally we find that it's little known and maybe not fully understood. A lot of people have never actually heard of force majeure leave. So it's a provision in Irish employment legislation that allows employees paid time off to attend a family crisis. There are 3 main questions that probably arise, I suppose, most of the time. What's considered a crisis? Who's considered to be a family member? And how long is the leave for? Okay. So force majeure, the entitlement basically is 3 days in a rolling 12-month period or 5 days in a rolling 36-month period. So for example, if we have an employee who takes 3 days force majeure in 2016, the first day was taken in February 2016, so that employee, in our case we have Sean, now has an entitlement of 2 days force majeure until February 2019. And again, records are very important here so that you know the days that have previously been taken within a 36-month period. Okay. So a family crisis. So the entitlement to force majeure leave applies where the employee's immediate presence is indispensable due to the illness or injury of a close family member. It's particularly, this is a particularly strict interpretation and generally relates to a medical emergency. While it's not impossible, it is rare that an employee would be entitled to consecutive days of force majeure leave, as generally the immediacy and emergency would have ended on day 1. So it's generally like it's an unforeseen emergency. Okay. An important point is force majeure leave does not give any entitlement to leave following the death of a close family member, because that would be dealt with under an employer's compassionate leave policy. Okay. So family crisis then, the employee's immediate presence is indispensable due to illness or injury of a close family member. So family members, it's a child, brother or sister, spouse, partner, a person to whom an employee has a duty of care. So this could be a parent, a grandparent, or any domestic dependent. So I suppose family member there is quite it's quite wide,
Yeah, so that kind of brings to the end of that. Just kind of when you're talking about force majeure there, and you're saying that it has to be if in the case of a medical emergency or an emergency, employers can request to see kind of evidence of such an emergency if they need to as well, or if you suspect any wrongdoing or whatnot.
And I suppose I should have said really that generally you can't give advance notice for force majeure. It's really when you come back to work or as soon as possible you're letting the employer know that you'd like to take that leave as force majeure leave.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of the nature of leave, you can't have plan it. So obviously, your absence and notification process that you have internally will require the employee to call in ASAP. And then generally, what would happen is once the employee returns to work, then you might request them to complete a particular form, just again for your record, so that you have that record kept. Perfect. So really, that brings us to an end to our presentation. I suppose just to very briefly summarise before we go to your questions. So paternity leave is here from the 1st of September. Really take it as an opportunity to put a policy in place and obviously review all your family-friendly leave policies, because as we've seen, they do interlink and intertwine, so it's really best practice to ensure kind of consistency across the board. As Audrey has gone through, running me through the payroll is very straightforward, really.
Revenue look after the taxation, so it's happy days for the employer.
Perfect. So really, we have a few questions and we'll go through them, but if you do have any specific cases or questions, please feel free to contact our support, and our details are there, and our lovely team will be happy to take your questions and queries. So I will take some questions now. Bear with us now for a moment until we bring them across. The question here, can a child under school age continue in play school or care while their parent takes parental leave? I suppose that would raise a few eyebrows for myself, because we did say that parental leave, ideally, the purpose of parental leave is to allow parents some flexibility in taking care of their younger children. So the question would be, why is the child in care in a different kind of in a play school environment, and why would the parent be off? It would raise some questions, but maybe there's issues around time.
Part-time care.
Yeah. You know, if there's not a possibility to have part-time working, maybe they need to be. So I suppose might raise queries, but without knowing the full situation.
So paternity leave then, can a sole trader claim the pay? So I mean, I would imagine that it's the same as maternity benefit, whereby self-employed people can, it's one of the only entitlements actually that self-employed, would have the same entitlement as a PAYE worker. So without looking into it, I would have to guess that the entitlement is the same.
It's the same, right, to sole traders. So yeah, perfect. Yeah. Another one here, if a mother dies during birth or shortly thereafter, is the father entitled to a longer paternity leave? This was in existence. This was in existence prior to the new paternity leave legislation coming in. So in the very unfortunate circumstance where a mother does pass away, the father is actually entitled then to the remainder of her maternity leave. Yeah. And that was always the case prior to paternity leave.
Somebody's asked here, what happens to a PRSA deduction during paternity and maternity leave? Really, that's something that the employer would need to discuss with the employee. If the employee is not receiving a payment while they're on these types of leave, best practice really would be for the employee to apply to take a pension holiday, if you like. So you can actually inform the pension provider that you're not in receipt of payment for that period, and basically you're just suspending your contributions until such a time as you come back. But it's best just that they know in advance that that's happening, so if there was any direct debits or anything in place, they wouldn't apply for that. If there's a payment going through, then by all means, then it can continue. So it really will depend on the the circumstances or the policy in place for the type of leave. So a couple of questions then, just looking, people asking about a copy of the presentation or the course notes. So this presentation has been and is being recorded, and everybody who registered for the webinar will receive a recording of that.
Yeah, absolutely. We will send that out. May not be today, but hopefully definitely probably by tomorrow. Also, there's questions coming in as well. I'm trying to get to most of them. When paying for hospital appointments, how is it calculated? Absolutely. So when you're talking about antenatal, apologies, you pay for the time to travel to the appointment, the time of the appointment, and then time to travel back. So really you're expecting the employee, and what the employee should be is to go directly to the appointment and directly back. And that's generally what would happen. And actually, we didn't touch on it, but fathers, again, they're entitled to go to 2 antenatal appointments as well, and they have an entitlement to be paid for those appointments as well. That's paid. It is paid. Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah. Just actually another one there. Can we contact somebody on maternity leave? Absolutely, I would say it'd be good practice. Obviously, people can be on maternity leave for quite an extended time, and it can also be quite daunting coming back from maternity leave if you haven't been in contact with your employer throughout that period. So it is good practice to keep in contact with an employee whilst they are on maternity leave, whether it is just touching base with them every so often to inform them of updates that are happening in the company, and you may want to invite them in for a day. But what I would say is decide before the employee goes on maternity leave. Sit down with them and kind of decide before they go, how are you going to get in contact with them if you need to? What's the best phone number or email, or what would they like? Obviously, you don't want to bombard the employee, so just agree with them, in advance. But don't totally forget about them when they're gone.
It's nice to know somebody's thinking of you when you're off.
Not just another one on maternity leave coming in there again. Can a person come back early from maternity leave? Absolutely, yes. The legislation states that as Olga said earlier, you have to take 2 weeks off before the baby is due, and you have to take a minimum of 4 weeks off after the baby is born. After that 4-week period has passed, then yes, the mother can come back then at any stage.
You would have to notify the department though if you're returning to work.
Yeah. Just for your pay. Yeah, whatever. Yeah. But technically they can. Yeah. Okay. So I think we will finish up there for now. If you have any more questions, do send them in, and if we haven't got to you today, we'll drop you an email afterwards to get back to you. And thank you all so much for attending. I hope you found it useful. And we do have a range of other webinars planned for the rest of the year, so do check out our webinars. I'm on the website.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.